It began on an ordinary night, when the world, for reasons unknown, fell into a strange and unexplainable silence. It was the kind of silence that made your ears ache, the kind that seemed to settle over everything like a heavy fog. The usual hum of machinery, the chatter of voices, the distant sounds of traffic, even the whispers of the wind, all of it simply stopped. For a brief moment, the stillness felt almost comforting, like the calm before a storm. But as the seconds stretched into minutes, unease began to settle in. The noise didn't return. Cities that never slept, that buzzed with the constant rhythm of life, were now eerily quiet. People checked their phones, expecting the usual notifications, only to find nothing. Radios crackled but emitted nothing but static, no alarms, no sirens. Just an overwhelming, suffocating silence. It wasn't the result of a disaster, not a power outage, and certainly not a natural catastrophe. It was as if the Earth had simply stopped. Humanity, in all its noisy glory, had come to an abrupt halt. Panic quickly set in, as people began to realize that something far stranger was happening. There were no explanations. Governments tried to issue statements, but even their usual channels of communication had gone silent. Emergency broadcasts fell on deaf ears. The entire planet seemed to be holding its breath. As the hours passed, the world struggled to adjust. How do you function in a place where even your own thoughts feel muffled? People began whispering about the cause, but no one had an answer. The sensation of losing control, of something far beyond their understanding unfolding without their consent, was the only certainty left. Something was happening. Something alien. But what? The mystery was only just beginning. The silence persisted for days, growing heavier, almost suffocating. It was during the fourth night of this unnerving quiet that the first sign of change appeared. It was subtle at first. A ripple in the stillness, like a disturbance in a pond. The stars above Earth flickered, as though blinking in unison, then a strange light filled the sky, stretching across the horizon, not quite like anything seen before. The glow wasn't bright or blinding, it was a cold, unnatural shimmer, diffusing across the atmosphere like mist. It was a signal. An announcement without sound. The world stood still, watching as the light descended. No one dared move, as if holding their breath, waiting for something they couldn't even comprehend. No one knew what it was, but everyone felt it. The quiet had become more than just the absence of noise. It was as though Earth itself had been paused, and now, someone, was about to unpause it. Then, without warning, the light shimmered and took shape. A vast, almost invisible structure, hovering in the atmosphere. It was not a ship, not a typical craft, but something far more alien. An impossible shape, unfathomable to human minds, existing in a way that defied the rules of physics. It did not land. It did not ascend like a typical invader's fleet would. It hovered, suspended in the air, motionless and silent, as though watching, as though waiting. The media broadcasted nothing but static. Governments sent signals that were swallowed whole by the void. The world collectively held its breath, uncertain whether to be frightened or fascinated. This was no invasion. No attack. Just an alien presence, a force that was neither benevolent nor malicious, simply there, observing. There was no communication, no offer of peace, no threat. Just an awareness that humanity was no longer alone in this quiet universe. The questions piled up faster than answers. What did this mean? Why were they here? What did they want? And more importantly, why had Earth suddenly gone silent? All they could do was wait and wonder. But the wait was about to be over. Amidst the growing tension and uncertainty, one name echoed through the corridors of power in the Galactic Union: Cael Verne. He was a man without a home, without a flag, without a nation. No one knew his true origins. Some believed he had come from Earth long ago. Others thought he had never belonged anywhere at all. He had a reputation for one thing: his unparalleled ability to solve problems no one else could. Cael Verne was a former soldier, a war strategist turned recluse. The last time anyone had seen him, he was deep in the outskirts of the galaxy, far away from the politics of the Galactic Union, living in isolation after the collapse of a long-forgotten war. It was only now, when the world faced an unsolvable problem, that he was called upon once again. He had no ties to any government, no alliances to any faction, but the Union knew that if anyone could decipher the strange alien presence looming over Earth, it was him. He was humanity's greatest tactical mind, the one who had won battles that should have been lost. And though humanity had long since faded, the legacy of his brilliance remained. The Union contacted him in the dead of night, their message as direct as it was urgent. "Cael Verne, we need you. The silence, the alien presence, you are the only one who might understand what's happening." Cael did not hesitate. He had lived alone for too long, hidden from the world's chaos. But now, a new challenge had arrived, one that demanded he step back into the light. As he boarded the Union's transport ship, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. This was no ordinary crisis. The fate of all life in the galaxy could be at stake, and he, Cael Verne, would be the one to solve it. With a silent resolve, he prepared for what was to come. Cael Verne stood before a massive holographic display, his sharp eyes scanning the cryptic symbols and data that floated before him. The alien presence had left behind a trail, not one that was easy to follow, but one that only someone with Cael's experience could begin to decipher. His mind, honed by years of battle strategies, was now focused on a puzzle that was far more complex than any war he had fought in the past. The clues were scattered across the universe, encrypted in ways humanity had never understood, and Earth's sudden silence was part of a larger, incomprehensible pattern. It wasn't an attack, and it wasn't just an observation, it was interference, purposeful and deliberate. He leaned closer to the hologram, his fingers tracing through the streams of data. The pattern made no sense at first. It wasn't a code, nor was it a message. It was something more abstract, more existential. It was the rhythm of silence itself, stretching back through time and space. Each interruption, each period of quiet, seemed to be a way of forcing the galaxy into a new phase of awareness, a new epoch. "What if we're not supposed to be here?" Cael murmured to himself, the thought pressing heavily on his mind. Could humanity have been placed here intentionally? Were they meant to exist in this space, at this time, or was it all just a cosmic accident? As Cael continued his analysis, pieces began to fall into place. The silence, the strange interference, the arrival of the alien force. They weren't random. They were a signal, one that pointed to a much larger truth about the origins of humanity, and their true place in the universe. Cael's fingers paused, hovering above the controls. One line of data stood out, a series of coordinates, untraceable in any known star chart. "What if the Earth was never supposed to be ours?" he whispered. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. The pattern he had uncovered pointed to something much darker than any invasion or external force. The truth was far worse than anyone could imagine. Nugsmian Myfix Kakning. The galaxy, it seemed, had always been a stage, and humanity was merely actors in a play they hadn't written. Cael Verne's discoveries had just begun to scratch the surface of the truth, but already, the implications were staggering. The galaxy had been placed in motion long ago, and humanity was never supposed to be the pinnacle of it. They had been an experiment. But who, or what, was behind the design? The alien interference grew more noticeable each day. Strange anomalies began to affect Earth's environment, with fluctuating electromagnetic pulses disrupting technology, and sudden fluctuations in gravity causing unexplainable events. It was not an attack, it was far more complex. An interruption, like a system trying to reroute its course. The Union's leadership was on edge. They had called upon Cael for answers, but he had only raised more questions. What were these alien forces truly doing? Why were they involved in a galaxy-spanning game of cosmic chess? And what role did humanity play? In a meeting with the Galactic Union's High Chancellor, Cael stood tall, his eyes scanning the alien leaders before him. They had agreed to share what little they knew about the aliens, but none of it made sense. There were no answers that satisfied, only more speculation and confusion. "The alien force is not here to conquer," Cael said, his voice cutting through the tension. "They are not here to destroy, they are here to correct." "Correct what?" asked the High Chancellor, his voice filled with disbelief. "They are here because something went wrong. Humanity, Earth, the entire galaxy, it wasn't supposed to be like this. The silence is their way of disrupting what we know. They want us to see the truth." The room fell silent. No one wanted to hear the truth. Cael could feel their fear rise, but he had no answers to offer, only more questions. "The silence will not end until we figure out what they want," he concluded, his mind now racing with the weight of the realization that this might be bigger than anyone could fathom. The galaxy had been carefully controlled, and now humanity was beginning to see the cracks. As Cael dug deeper into the alien data, an unsettling truth began to emerge, something that shook the foundations of everything humanity had ever believed. The answers were hidden in the stars, encrypted in the same pattern that had caused the end of noise. He could feel the weight of what he was about to uncover. This was no longer just about an alien invasion or a strange interference. This was about humanity's true origins. The coordinates he had found earlier had led him to a system in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, a place untouched by time and forgotten by history. This system, called the Lumara Nebula, held secrets that no one had dared to investigate. It was a dead zone, a place that sent shivers down the spines of those who knew of it. But Cael's instinct told him that the truth lay there, beyond the reach of time, waiting to be uncovered. A hologram flickered to life before him as he entered the restricted files, images of ancient ruins on a barren planet. The markings on the ruins matched the same symbols that had been encrypted in the patterns he had uncovered. The symbols weren't alien in origin, nor were they from any known race. They were ancient symbols, older than even humanity itself. What if we weren't the first? Cael muttered aloud, his hand brushing over the images, each one more puzzling than the last. The truth hit him like a wave. Humanity had not originated on Earth. Earth had been chosen as a cradle, but it was not their true home. The alien force, the silence, the interference, it was all connected to one simple fact. Humanity had been placed on Earth, a species born of a galaxy not their own, meant to grow, evolve, and learn, only to be wiped out in the end. The realization sent shockwaves through Cael's mind. If humanity wasn't from Earth, then where were they truly from? And more importantly, who had placed them here? The answers lay hidden, but the mystery was beginning to unravel. As Cael Verne continued to sift through the complex web of alien information, he stumbled upon something that made his blood run cold. It wasn't just about humanity's origins, it was about their purpose, or more accurately, their misplaced purpose. Humanity had been an experiment, but they were not the first to be tested in such a manner. He found records of ancient species that had existed long before humanity, and the pattern he was uncovering was disturbingly familiar. These species, just like humanity, had been placed on planets to evolve, to grow, and to form civilizations. They had risen to power, only to be extinguished when they were no longer needed. Some had been erased from history completely, while others had been absorbed into the greater galactic design, but all had shared the same fate. Humanity, it seemed, was no different. They had been planted on Earth by a far older and far more powerful race, one that had been observing the galaxy for millennia, selecting species to develop and study, and ensuring they followed the same predetermined path. The silence that had descended upon Earth, the strange interference from the alien force, was all part of this grand experiment. Cael felt a deep unease in the pit of his stomach as the pieces began to fit together. The aliens he had once thought of as invaders were not enemies. They were merely the custodians of this twisted galactic order. The interference wasn't an attack, it was a correction. They didn't just choose us, Cael whispered to himself. They made us. The truth was overwhelming, but the deeper question still remained. Why? Why had they chosen humanity in the first place? What had they hoped to achieve with their experiment? And most importantly, what would happen now that humanity had begun to question their role in the galaxy? The answers were close, but Cael knew one thing for certain. The galaxy was far more complicated than anyone had ever imagined. And humanity was just a small piece in a much larger, more dangerous puzzle. Cael Verne stood in front of the massive, glowing portal that had materialized in the center of the Union's war room. It was not a door, nor a window, but something far more alien. The air around it hummed with an otherworldly energy, and the stars beyond seemed to bend, refracting in odd patterns. He could feel it, the weight of something ancient, something beyond even the galaxy's comprehension. "Are you ready?" Lena, the strategist, asked, her voice steady but betraying a hint of anxiety. Cael nodded, his gaze fixed on the swirling light. He knew this moment had been coming. The silence, the interference, the alien force, they had all been leading to this. The galaxy's greatest mystery was about to be revealed, and Cael was the only one who could witness it. As the portal opened wider, a voice reverberated through the room, not through the air, but directly in their minds, as though the words were etched into the very fabric of their consciousness. "We have waited for you." The voice was neither malevolent nor kind. It was a statement, impassive, devoid of emotion. The presence that followed was more than just a voice. It was a collective of ancient beings, unfathomable in their wisdom, beings that had shaped and influenced countless civilizations throughout the universe's history. "We?" Cael thought, the question slipping past his lips. "We are the architects," the voice continued, "and we have watched, we have guided, and now, the experiment reaches its end." The gravity of the words sank in. The architects, as they were called, were the ones who had shaped the galaxy, chosen species, manipulated evolution, and in humanity's case, placed them on Earth. They were the cosmic force that had been pulling the strings all along. "Kezim, what do you want from us?" Cael's voice was low, but there was a sense of quiet defiance in it. "We do not want, we merely observe. The final decision lies with you, human." The atmosphere in the room shifted. The silence seemed even heavier now. The architects were not there to conquer or destroy. They were there to finish what they had started. The question now was whether humanity would continue to follow their path, or if, for the first time, they would decide their own fate. The room was thick with tension as the architect's presence lingered, filling the air with an ancient, unspoken weight. Cael Verne, standing in the center of the room, could feel the very fabric of the galaxy bend around him. The architects had revealed themselves, and now they awaited a response. They had seeded countless worlds, watched civilizations rise and fall, and humanity was just another chapter in their long-forgotten history. For a long moment Cael didn't speak. He couldn't. The enormity of what he had just learned was overwhelming. Earth was not humanity's true home. It had been a cradle, an artificial sanctuary for a species chosen, or rather, created to serve a higher purpose. Humanity's origins weren't from Earth, but from somewhere else, somewhere deeper within the universe, far beyond their understanding. "We were never meant to be here," Cael said, his voice steady but heavy with the gravity of the discovery. "Earth wasn't our home." "Correct." The voice of the architects answered in a chorus of thoughts. "You were placed. You are part of a larger design, an experiment to see if life could evolve, adapt, and flourish under alien guidance. Humanity was always meant to be temporary." The realization hit Cael like a freight train. They weren't the first experiment, they weren't even the last. Earth was just one of many stages, and humanity's time on it was always meant to be brief, a stepping stone in a much larger cosmic narrative. "But if we were meant to be temporary," Cael asked, "why let us rise so high? Why let us believe we were the pinnacle of creation?" "Because human, the nature of your existence was never about dominance. It was about potential. You were placed here to prove a theory, to see if a species could surpass the design placed before them." The weight of their words settled on Cael's shoulders. Humanity was never the experiment's final goal. They were just a stepping stone for something far more ancient, far more powerful. Yet, the more Cael reflected, the more something else gnawed at him. If humanity had been an experiment, who were the architects, and what did they truly want from the galaxy? As the weight of the architect's words settled over Cael, the silence in the room became almost unbearable. He stood still, his mind racing, piecing together the fractured puzzle of his existence. Humanity wasn't the first to be manipulated like this. They were part of a much larger design, a design that had been taking place for millennia, across countless species and worlds. The question now loomed before him. What was humanity's true purpose? Had they truly evolved beyond their creator's expectations? Or were they merely the latest in a long line of failed experiments? The architect's voice resonated again, but this time it wasn't as cold or indifferent. There was something almost pleading in their words. "Your species, humanity, has surpassed all expectations. You have evolved beyond the boundaries we set. Your resilience, your creativity, and your drive to survive. These are the traits that define you now. You are no longer an experiment. You are a force of nature." Cael absorbed their words with quiet resolve, but his mind was torn. Humanity had always been driven by the need to conquer, to claim their place in the galaxy. But now, faced with the truth that their existence had been guided, controlled, and shaped by beings far beyond their comprehension, the impulse to rebel against this cosmic force felt small, futile. "But what do you want from us now?" Cael asked, his voice steady but full of disbelief. "Chain Keltrol, we have waited long enough. It is time for you to decide. Do you want to continue your journey as you have been? To follow the paths laid before you? To become another relic in the grand design? Or will you break free? Will you choose to shape your own destiny, outside the framework we've created for you?" The question hung in the air, as still and silent as the galaxy itself. Cael's heart pounded. This was the moment. The choice had been laid out before him, and for the first time humanity could make a decision that would shape not only their own future, but the entire galaxy's. Would they fight for autonomy, for the right to choose their own path, no matter how uncertain it might be? Cael stood tall, his eyes narrowing as he spoke, his decision clear. "We're not your experiment anymore," he said. "We will decide our fate, and this time, we will do it on our terms." With Cael's words echoing in the chamber, the room seemed to hold its breath. The silence that followed was profound, as if the very fabric of reality had paused to witness the turning point in humanity's history. The architects who had once controlled the course of life across galaxies now faced the first species willing to challenge their authority. The High Chancellor stepped forward, his expression filled with apprehension but also a glimmer of hope. The galaxy had been living under the architect's thumb for millennia, shaped by their hands, their designs. But now, Cael Verne had presented a new possibility. The idea of defying the architects, of taking the reins of their own future, was a dangerous yet tantalizing one. "Are you sure about this, Commander?" the High Chancellor asked, his voice hesitant. To defy them would mean war, not just with the architects, but with the galaxy itself. The consequences could be unimaginable. Cael turned to face the council, his gaze unwavering. "We've lived under their rules long enough. We've been shaped, molded into something they wanted. But what about us? What about humanity's own will? It's time we stood up and decided our place in this universe." The room was filled with uneasy murmurs. Some of the council members looked to Cael with admiration, others with fear. It was a bold move, one that could either mark the beginning of a new era or lead to the destruction of everything humanity had fought for. "We can't afford to wait for their approval any longer," Cael continued, his voice steady, filled with authority. "We will not be another experiment. We will break free from their control, and we will take our destiny into our own hands." The council fell silent. The weight of his decision was immense, but Cael was resolute. Humanity had a chance to forge its own path, and this time, they would not be passive participants. The architects had underestimated them, and now they would face the consequences. A new war was about to begin, a war for freedom, for identity, and for the right to choose their own future. "Prepare yourselves," Cael said quietly, his words ringing in the chamber. "We are no longer their experiment. We are humanity, and we will fight for our place in the galaxy." The first steps toward rebellion were always the hardest, but Cael Verne had already made his choice, and he was unwavering. The galaxy, in all its grandeur and complexity, had always been governed by the invisible hand of the architects. But now, that hand was about to be shoved aside. The human commander had ignited a fire in the hearts of not just his fellow humans, but also the alien species who had once been bound by the architect's influence. Despite the risk, despite the fear, many of the representatives from the Galactic Union now stood with him. They could see the power in his words, the drive to change the very foundation of their existence. "We fight because we are not toys in someone else's game," Cael declared as he stood before the newly formed alliance of species. "We fight because, for the first time, we have a chance to carve our own path. Together, we stand against the architect's control. Together, we choose our future." The alien leaders, many of whom had never considered defying the architects, were now beginning to realize the magnitude of what Cael proposed. They had been living under the illusion of unity and peace, manipulated into believing that their survival depended on the architect's guidance. But now, faced with the raw emotion and resolve of humanity, they saw that freedom could be theirs too. Razor, the Etheri assassin, spoke next. "I've never followed anyone, not even my own kind. But there's something about this. Something real. I'm in." Lena, the strategist, added, "We've always followed the Architect's rules. It's time to rewrite them." The rebellion was now no longer just an idea. It was a united force, one that would tear apart the very foundation of the Architect's control. The battle for freedom had begun. The stakes had never been higher. But the Architects were not blind. They were aware of the growing resistance. They had always been steps ahead, calculating every move. And now, they would have to face a challenge like none they had encountered before. Cael stood at the forefront, knowing the battle ahead would be hard and costly. Yet in that moment, he knew one thing for certain: they would fight with everything they had. They would win or die trying. "The galaxy doesn't belong to them," he muttered. "It belongs to us." The silence that had followed Cael's declaration of war soon transformed into the sounds of military preparations. The galaxy, once unified under the control of the Architects, was now divided. What had once been a coordinated, peaceful union was now a battleground for survival and freedom. The time for passive acceptance was over. Cael's alliance, composed of humans and their alien allies, had begun their resistance. But their enemies, the Architects, had not been idle. The Architects, who had manipulated galaxies for eons, did not allow for rebellion without consequences. Their vast godlike presence loomed across the galaxy, unnoticed until now. But now, they were coming for the galaxy's resistance. And they would not be kind. As Cael stood in the war room, scanning the incoming intel, the atmosphere shifted, the skies darkened, the stars seemed to pulse with an unnatural frequency. He could feel it, the hum of the Architect's vast power descending upon them. "They're mobilizing," Lena said, her voice tight with fear. "The Architects are not just sitting back anymore. They've launched an all-out counterattack." The massive fleet of the Architects appeared out of nowhere, their ships like towering monoliths made of dark energy, capable of destabilizing planets with their mere presence. A message was sent to the Union leaders across the galaxy. "You are insignificant. Your resistance will be crushed. Your rebellion is a distraction. You have no place in our design." The attack was swift, like a tidal wave of destruction sweeping across the galaxy. The Architects were not merely seeking to defeat them, they were seeking to obliterate every last trace of humanity's defiance. Entire cities were wiped out, their inhabitants caught in the crossfire, as the Architects' forces tore through everything in their path. The resistance, unprepared for the sheer scale of the Architects' wrath, was left reeling. The fight had suddenly escalated. "We have to fight back," Cael muttered, a spark of fury igniting in his eyes. "They think they can crush us like this? No, this isn't over, we're just getting started." The Architects had struck back hard, but in the human commander's mind, the war was far from lost. If anything, it had just begun. It was a war of survival, one that would test the mettle of the galaxy's last hope. The galaxy, now awake and united in defiance, was ready to face whatever the Architects threw their way. The question was no longer if humanity could win, but how. In the aftermath of the Architects' devastating counterattack, the galaxy was left shaken, but not broken. The alien species that had once stood divided were now bound by the shared resolve to fight back. Cael Verne, humanity's greatest warrior, stood at the helm of the rebellion, guiding his allies through the chaos. The Architects' overwhelming force had nearly crushed their resolve. But in the face of total annihilation, something extraordinary happened. The human spirit, once thought to be extinct, ignited across the galaxy. Alien species who had never seen humanity as anything more than a relic of a past age, now saw them as the symbol of defiance, of perseverance. In the deepest chambers of the Union's war room, Cael watched as the galaxy's resistance began to regroup. New alliances were formed, old grudges were forgotten, and warriors from every corner of the galaxy rallied under the banner of unity, led by the last of humanity. Cael's calm demeanor, his quiet determination, had become their rallying cry. "They want to erase us," Cael said as he addressed the council. "They want us to fall, to bend to their will, but they've underestimated something. something that's always been at the heart of humanity. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. We fight not because we must, but because we choose to. We fight because we refuse to be a footnote in someone else's history. This galaxy doesn't belong to the architects. It belongs to all of us, those who dare to stand against the darkness. A wave of quiet determination spread through the room. For the first time, the galaxy's resistance felt like more than a fleeting spark. It felt like a fire that could not be extinguished. And with Cael's leadership, they would take the fight to the architects, not just to survive, but to ensure that the galaxy would never again be ruled by an unseen hand. We are not your experiment anymore, Cael continued, his voice steady. We are humanity's legacy, and we will fight for a future where every species has the right to choose its own path. The galaxy's final battle had begun. Human Cases Aracho, the galaxy's pulse quickened as the resistance began to organize, forming pockets of defiance across the stars. Every species that had once cowered beneath the shadow of the architects now stood tall, united under one banner, one purpose. No longer were they disparate groups struggling for survival. They were a collective force, galvanized by the humanity's indomitable spirit. At the center of it all stood Cael Verne, the commander who had emerged from centuries of cryosleep to become a symbol of what it meant to defy impossible odds. His actions, his words, had stirred the hearts of millions across the galaxy. He wasn't just leading a rebellion, he was teaching an entire universe how to fight for its future. We have one shot at this, Cael said, his voice cutting through the murmur of strategy meetings. We cannot afford to hesitate. If we give them even an inch, they will take everything from us. The architects might have thought we were insignificant, but they have no idea what we're capable of when we come together. He stood before a holographic map of the galaxy, his finger tracing the lines of the architects' invasion routes. Their fleet was vast, but their weakness, Cael knew, lay in their overconfidence. They believed themselves untouchable, and that arrogance would be their downfall. The first phase of the rebellion's plan was to disrupt the architects' control over key star systems. Razor, Scar and Lena, among others, had already mobilized their forces to sabotage the architects' fleet, while Isha worked tirelessly to develop countermeasures against their advanced technologies. But even as Cael's forces struck against the architects' supply lines, the knowledge that a final, decisive battle loomed in the distance gnawed at him. The rebellion was about to make its boldest move. If they succeeded, they could cripple the architects' reign. If they failed, the galaxy would be lost forever. We've come too far to turn back, Cael said, his eyes steely with resolve. We will not let them take the galaxy. This is our fight now, and we will win it or die trying. The stage was set. The heart of the resistance was beating strong, and the final confrontation with the architects was drawing near. The galaxy's last hope had come to this, an all-out confrontation between the resistance and the architects. The final assault was about to begin. After months of preparation, Cael and his diverse team of allies stood ready. The architects, in their arrogance, had underestimated the combined strength of the galaxy's defiant species. But now, they would pay the price. Cael stood in the command center, his eyes glued to the star maps projected before him. His face was calm, but the tension in the air was palpable. Every movement, every decision in the coming hours would determine whether the galaxy would survive or fall to the architect's oppressive rule. This is it, Cael muttered under his breath. We've done everything we can. Now, we make our move. His hand hovered over the launch controls, the final phase of their plan at his fingertips. Across the galaxy, fleets of ships, alien and human, had gathered, poised to strike at the heart of the architect's empire. The resistance forces were ready. The architect's forces, stretched thin and reeling from previous attacks, were vulnerable. It was now or never. Razor, Thrak, get to your positions, Cael instructed, his voice steady but filled with urgency. Scar, Isha, make sure the tech is ready. We need every advantage we can get. As the final assault began, the resistance forces launched their attack. Razor and his stealth team infiltrated the enemy's strongest fortresses, while Scar and Thrak's brute force drew the architect's attention away from the true target, their command center. Lena, the strategist, had devised the perfect misdirection, drawing the architect's focus to false fronts. In the chaos of battle, Cael's eyes never left the battlefield. Every second counted. He knew that the stakes were higher than ever before. Victory or death hung in the balance, and only one side would emerge standing. "This ends today," Cael said, his voice firm. "We'll end their reign once and for all." The final push was underway, and there was no turning back. The battle had erupted across the stars, with forces from every corner of the galaxy clashing against the architect's war machines. The resistance, under Cael's leadership, had launched their final assault with an intensity that surprised even their most hardened enemies. Every strike, every maneuver was calculated. But the real challenge lay in the heart of the architect's empire, where their greatest strength resided, their leadership. As Cael's fleet approached the heart of the architect's domain, their ships like shadows against the stars, the weight of the mission bore down on him. It wasn't just the fate of the galaxy at stake anymore, it was the truth of their existence. Would they finally break free, or would the architects crush them once again? In the center of the architect's flagship, their leader, a towering ethereal figure of energy and light, stood as a symbol of their power. Their immense intellect, their control over life itself, had shaped the galaxy for millennia. Now, Cael and his team were about to confront the being that had controlled the destiny of every species. "We've arrived," Cael said, his voice unwavering as he addressed his team. "This is where we break them, disrupt their leadership, and the rest will fall." Razor, Scar and the rest of the team prepared to infiltrate the flagship, using the distraction caused by Thrak's relentless assault to breach the command center. They moved swiftly, executing the plan with precision. The architect's forces, overwhelmed by the chaos on every front, were now fighting for survival, but the real fight was happening within the flagship. Cael was about to face the leader of the architects, his most dangerous adversary yet. The moment of truth was at hand. The leader of the architects, powerful beyond measure, stood waiting. "Let's end this," Cael muttered, stepping into the breach. "For the galaxy, for freedom." And with that, the final